current lectionary of the Episcopal and many other churches does not seem to relate in any direct or indirect way to the Old Testament and the epistle lessons. So before I really get to the point, which is to deal with those two lessons, I just want to make one comment about the gospel. And that is that it includes and ends with that famous line, "You will always have the poor with you." I have found myself in the same context on repeated occasions where we talk about how difficult it may be to help those who are less fortunate than ourselves, people who are, for one reason or another, often not their fault, finding themselves at the bottom level of society. And people will quote this passage saying, "Well, the poor you will always have with you." And I say, that was a prophecy. It was not a commandment. It does not excuse us from doing what we can to change that situation, even though in reality it has proven itself over the centuries to be an almost intractable issue to us. So let me lay that aside and speak about the other two lessons and what I think they have to say to us, which I think is really very important, particularly to you all at All Saints, with where you are in your common life together. And let me start with a personal story. About a month ago, we decided that we wanted to take a look at our termite contract and see if we wanted to stay with the people we were with or move to another exterminating company. Because we live in an older community and it's rather wooded, and over the course of the time that the house has been there, it has in fact been invaded twice by termites. So we feel the need to protect it as much as we can. And we called this one company and they explained their system, and it really had to do with little things that stuck in the ground that are basically a bait. Once the termites find it, they will gravitate to it. It's not that it attracts the termites, but once they find it, they'll go there rather than into the house. And then, of course, it has a poison in it, which they carry back to the colony, and then the whole colony ends up dying. But in the course of the conversation, he talked about how that worked. He says it doesn't kill the termites immediately, the way some antkillers do, for instance. They eat the poison, they come back, they die, they get eaten by other ants, and then the whole colony dies that way. But with this one, what happens is that it prevents the new skin from growing. And since they can't grow, they die. Termites and most insects are like crabs that we know so well in Maryland. They can't grow once their shell is hard. They have to grow a new one underneath, and then they shed the hard one, and the new one is able to kind of reach out to its full length, and then it hardens up, and then the whole process starts over again. Well, this interrupts that process. And I thought, what an amazing modern parable to illustrate the point that any living thing must either grow or die. It is true for every living thing, including fully mature human beings. Even though we've reached our full stature that we call maturity as human beings, the scientists tell us that the dynamic is still the same. We're always producing new cells to replace old cells that are dying off. And the aging process is really a matter of the new cells not being produced the way they were when we were younger. And eventually we reach the point where we got more dying than are growing. And then, of course, we enter into our decline and eventual death. I tell that story because I think that in many ways this is what Isaiah is trying to say, under the inspiration of God, and what Paul is saying to us as well in this piece from his letter to the Philippians. Let's start with the Isaiah passage, because he says, "Do you not see? I am doing a new thing." The context of this, of course, is the people are still in the Babylonian exile, which was a bitter, bitter experience for the people. Although our psalm today is a psalm of joy in restoration from the exile, there are many other psalms that are clearly laments of the experience that they've had, all of which tend to look back to the glory days, particularly of King David and King Solomon, kind of glossing over all those generations of kings that turned away from the Lord and turned the people away from the Lord, and the long decline of Israel because of their own corruption. But they hark back to those glory days. They hark back to when the Lord saved them from bondage in Egypt and wondered, why doesn't God do this again? Well, God is about to do it again. And Isaiah is his messenger to reassure them and to announce the fact that the Lord is indeed doing a new thing. And he uses the imagery of the Exodus, that as they pass through the waters of the Red Sea and through the many, many years passing through the wilderness to eventually get to the Promised Land, so now the mountains will be brought down, the valleys will be filled up, my people will be able to walk a straight path back to the land that was promised to their ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Because the people were dwelling in the past, kind of nostalgically, kind of longingly, and God is saying, you cannot stagnate anymore. If we are going to continue our relationship, if you are going to continue to be my people, if you are going to continue to be a light unto the nations of the world, we must move forward, and I, your God, am going to lead the way. Even as Isaiah says this, he is also prophesying the next new thing. The next new thing, which is the coming of Christ. Because you see, the whole story of the Bible is beyond our human failure and the corruption that has caused within our nature. God has been preparing the way all along for the coming of the Messiah, and leading on from his coming to spread that news and that gift of redemption to the entire world until the final new thing when he comes again. The life of the people of God is one of continually being called forward into a deeper relationship, into a relationship that is always growing in understanding, and in a relationship that allows God to work through us and allows us to be God's instruments for his grace at work within the world. And so God is always leading us on, because in that living relationship, if we do not grow, we will stagnate and we will die. Paul makes that clear that this is true of the Christian life as well. And he says, this is what I do. Forgetting what lies behind, I press on to the upward call in Jesus Christ. What a powerful, powerful passage. Paul had a lot that he could have lived in the past about his relationship with Jesus Christ. When you read the commentators, they pick up on these various ways, 3 of which I've alluded to already. One is to live in regret. And clearly, Paul had plenty to resist. I am the foremost among sinners because I persecuted the church of Christ. So there's always that past that could have nagged at him and caused him to live in that regret for the rest of his life. But he didn't. Forgetting what lies behind, he presses on to the upward call in Jesus Christ. Knowing himself forgiven, he lived into the freedom of that healing that God had given him in his life. He could have also been nostalgic. He alludes in this passage earlier to the wonderful experience of having seen the risen Lord himself. An experience that most all Christians don't have until we pass out of this life and see him in glory. But he saw him in this world, in this life. He had the joy of that experience. He could have dwelt the rest of his days just in the glow of that. But he didn't. Forgetting what lies behind, he pressed on to the upward call in Jesus Christ. And he could have been complacent. He could have said, "Thank God I'm saved. Thank the good Lord he revealed the way to me." And then just sort of sat in that joy. Except it wouldn't have lasted. Because part of God's call to Paul was exactly that. The call to be the apostle to the Gentiles. To carry the gospel forth. To be God's agent. And so it is with us in our relationship with God. God has called each and every one of us in a unique way and giving us gifts to be able to serve him in that unique way. You see, in order to keep growing in the Christian life, in order to keep growing in our relationship with Christ, we need to build on those three traditional foundations that have been part of Christian spirituality for many centuries. That is prayer, that is study, and that is service. Those of you who are familiar with the Curcio movement within the church, a couple of those words are a little different in that context, but that's what they're talking about. It's something that's been a part of Christian spiritual pilgrimage for many, many centuries. In our prayer life, both privately and corporately, our relationship with Christ is deepened. In a very personal way, we get to know him as a friend. In our study of God's Word, we grow in understanding. Oh, this is the way God works. Oh, this is the way God wants us to go. And through our service, we actually put it into action that then reinforces that relationship within our lives. And we find ourselves more and more, as Jesus said, friends, partners in service to God's kingdom, bringing the grace of Christ into the world in which we live. Now that is true for individuals, and it is also true for communities, particularly communities of God's family. The church universal and the church as a parish family. You obviously are in a time where God is calling you forth. You should be able to hear God say, "Behold, I'm doing a new thing. Can you not see it? How can you escape it?" I mean, you're just in that interim looking for your new leader. And it's right and it's appropriate to, for those who feel a keen sense of loss about the one who has left, and to feel that sadness. But it is not okay to dwell in the past. It is a time to be looking at the ways in which God is calling this family of faith into its new future, which is God's future. And to follow where he leads in that pathway. Because those who do not grow will stay stagnate and will die. But thanks be to God. We have this word, this assurance from God that He is with us, that He is leading the way, that He already knows the future and invites us to join Him. Let us indeed forget what lies behind and press on to that upward call in Jesus Christ, not just as individuals,